Hello everyone, I'm delighted to be joining you today really to congratulate David on the publication of his book. Of course, David has been a stalwart of Westminster. He has been around for a long time, but of course he's got a great deal of experience, insight and knowledge. He's of course a fellow Essex MP and a great Essex MP. So David, I look forward to receiving my copy of your book, and of course I wish you every success.
Next month, a book which I have written called Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster, will be published, part of which covers Brexit. And yes, by inference, everyone will be in the book. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the last general election was not fought on how political parties might handle the coronavirus pandemic, but was categorically about ensuring that the result of the 2016 referendum was implemented in full? Will my right honourable friend confirm that that is what he intends to see happen?
Prime Minister. I can indeed, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend on his new book.
And if you were to read his excellent book, Madam Deputy Speaker, Eyes and Ears, probably available in all good bookshops, you would be aware that he is the proud patron of the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation and has devoted much of his life to campaigning on behalf of our furry friends.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this event. Thank you for joining. If at the end of my being interviewed you would like to ask me any questions, please put those questions in the live chat section. And if you would like to purchase the book, there is a link that you can find below. So please go to that. You can get the book from Ian Dale at Politicos. You can get it from Amazon. You can also get it direct from Lueth, the publishers. But finally, you could also get it directly from myself. I've got a number of my books in the House of Commons, and through your own Member of Parliament, if you tell them that you would like the book, I'm sure they'd be only too pleased to collect them directly from my office in the House of Commons. I hope you enjoy the evening.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And now, after Essex, I'm in my next favourite county of Kent, the Garden of England. And this evening, I'm with two of my very good friends, Sir Roger Gale and Natalie Elphick. And they are going to interview me about my book. And although they don't know it, Sir Roger is going to be taking the part of Michael Parkinson. And Natalie is going to be taking the part of Oprah Winfrey, poor thing. Anyway, look, Roger, Natalie, it's over to you. Who wants to ask me the first question?
Well, shall I kick it off? Because
yeah, you kick it off, Roger.
You and I, as we've established, went into the House not only in the same year, but actually literally on the same day.
Indeed.
Well, I think you were a few moments ahead of me.
Yeah.
But quite a lot has changed in that period, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But we've all got our own views of what being a Member of Parliament is like. And I wonder what you think of both the best bits and the worst bits of the job. First of all, probably when you came in and then now.
Yeah. Well, look, Roger, although you and I have obviously got different life experiences and might have a different take on it all, according to my other half, she thinks I increasingly sound like Victor Meldrew. I don't know, going back to the good old days, whatever the good old days were. But my goodness, it is such a different world now to what it was in 1983. And if I answer directly the good bits and the bad bits, and let's start with the bad bits. The longer you're an MP, the longer there are opportunities for your opponents to dig the dirt up on you and make life pretty intolerable. Well, of course, when you and I first started, Roger, people wrote letters. There wasn't anything like the internet or social media. So when people want to make your life miserable, it's much quicker today. Now, because like you, I've been in the place now for nearly 4 decades, if anyone wants to go on Wikipedia, although if you go on mine, it seems to be changed all the time, you can see that on any number of occasions, I've had a pretty grim time, really. And it's your family who I think take the biggest hit of all, and particularly your children. Because whereas I signed up to all this, and my wife would say she didn't realise completely what she was letting herself in for, in the early years, I mean, obviously all my children are grown up now and technically off my hands, but my goodness, there were some pretty vicious things done towards one or two of them at the time. Now, of course, that bad experience, it happens immediately. I mean, as soon as something happens, perhaps in your personal life or in a wider sense, as a result of your duties as an MP, it's immediately up there on social media, and you get death threats, and my goodness, it's pretty tough now. But the good points, Roger, without any question, probably are the things that no one knows about, really. When you manage to help a particular constituent, get no publicity for it, they say thank you, and I mean, it might be the most trivial thing, for goodness sake, that you've managed to get their bins changed, or a really big thing like you managed to do a letter and a life-saving operation took place, and that is so very satisfying. For me, Roger, I've got a number of things that I'm particularly pleased about. And that's I've got a number of bits of legislation that I've piloted on the statute book. And you and I are great animal lovers. So I got an animal sanctuary up and running when I was the MP for Basildon. And I was instrumental in helping a lady build a hospice. And literally it started with just someone donating a penny. So that they are, in summary, the highs and lows and the good and the bad bits of it all. But I think helping individual constituents, which, look, for goodness sake, isn't that what the job is all about? We're supposed to be persons, and it's just helping individuals with the many challenges which they face in their daily lives.
And I really think that is something that hasn't changed. I have to say, as a new MP coming in 2019, that is such a rewarding part of the job, helping people, making a difference in everyday life. So that's just really good to hear. Now, as a new MP in 2019, I had the benefit of my neighbour, Sir Roger Gale, to help me find my feet and navigate my way through the many excitements of the House. What do you think of our 2019 intake? And what advice would you give us coming into the House?
How can you do this to me? Oh my goodness. You're asking me to comment on the, oh dear. Right.
We're obviously the best intake that there's been since 1983. Yeah. I'm sure you'd agree with that. But yeah, what advice would you give us to make the best of our time in Parliament?
I could spare you, David. I could tell you what I think of them.
Yeah. Well, look, Natalie, when Roger was expected to win his seat in 1983, I think that's right, but I certainly wasn't expected to win Basildon in 1983. But there were lots of colourful characters elected in that intake, and I suppose every intake is different. Your intake, Natalie, is very, very, very different. They look different physically to our intake. I mean, I suppose our intake were seen as mainly boring men wearing suits. Well, the chaps elected now, I mean, half of them are running around in tracksuits and even shorts half the time. Well, that wouldn't have happened in 1983.
I think some of us wish it wouldn't happen now. Well, yeah, especially the shorts.
I'm hoping that behind the scenes, words are said about all this, because I'm not in favour, God, this sounds old-fashioned, I'm not in favour of lowering standards, really, and I think we chaps should wear a tie and look the part and and ladies likewise. And of course, when I was elected in 1983, there weren't that many ladies elected. Your intake is full of them. And I've got to say, Natalie, some of them are very forceful. They are not wilting violets or whatever the expression is. And I don't mean this in an unkind way, but perhaps Roger was different. They've got much more confidence than I had as a newly elected MP. I was in awe of everyone. I knew my place. And the idea that I would suddenly start running things or chairing things or organising things, oh no. It wasn't like that in 1983. It took a long time, frankly, to learn about the place and to feel comfortable raising my head above the parapet. I mean, for goodness sake, Natalie, I was elected in June 1983. I didn't even make my maiden speech until January 1984. Whereas, of course, now everyone makes their speech immediately. They don't wait for a big occasion. And I was waiting for a big occasion. I actually followed Ted Heath, and it was on the Roger will laugh at this. It was called the poll tax. I never called it that. The rate capping bill, which in my old constituency was a big issue. And I also think, Natalie, that the skills needed to be an MP in 1983 are very different to what are needed now. It's, as I talk, my mouth goes up to one face and, I haven't got the best broadcasting voice ever. Well, I think now with the new intakes, it's a little bit how you look. It's a little bit like how you can handle social media, but they are much, much more forceful than we were. And the final thing I would say, Natalie, and you won't take offence at this has been a rotten parliament so far. It's not been a proper parliament. We had the election on the 12th of December 2019, and the coronavirus pandemic hit us all. So we've hardly been there. And frankly, we haven't really got to know your intake on a personal level as much as I hope we will. But God willing, when we get back to some sort of normality, I'm looking forward to getting to know them big time.
Great. Roger, your question.
I was just thinking, David, what you're saying about the way that people made their maiden speeches then and now is absolutely true. I had the privilege of sitting in the big chair as the acting deputy speaker during part of the Queen's speech in 2019. And not one, but I should think a dozen new members of Parliament made their maiden speeches on the Queen's speech, which I think in our day would have been unheard of. Just thinking about that, tell us a bit. I've got some ideas, and so have you. So you tell us how you think the traditions have changed. One that springs to mind, obviously, is if in the days gone by, if you wanted to raise a point of order during a division, you had to be seated wearing an opera hat. Now that's gone out of the window, but what other things have changed?
Well, of course, Roger, you and I are on the chairman's panel, although you're more senior to me. You've been on the chairman's panel longer than I have, and it gives a brilliant opportunity to observe our colleagues. I am a traditionalist. I find change quite difficult, but I accept it now. For goodness sake, I'm even on Twitter now. I don't get engaged with people on Twitter, but I post things on Twitter. So the tradition, Roger, that you and I experienced when we were first elected, I really want to hang on to it. Now, you're going to be horrified. I quite liked it when colleagues were thrown out of the chamber. I thought it was marvellous. The sergeant and ours being sent to escort people. You and I were there in the chamber when Skinner and his mob stood in front of the mace and halted Nigel Lawson's budget. Well, that never happens now, frankly. And I doubt if any colleague would know that you could say, I spy strangers, and you could clear the public gallery. And I think that much as I love the building and the palace, I think it's also about the traditions. So the lobbies, I think it's great that we vote physically in person. And I'm horrified that I've been signed up with all these other colleagues to give my vote to someone else to place for me. But the tradition, Roger, that you and I know of walking through the lobbies, it gives us an opportunity to physically see colleagues, chat to them, ask them what they're doing about things. And you and I know, Roger, the amount of, frankly, historic changes that have been made through colleagues grabbing the Prime Minister or the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and then they go away and think about it. And it's not the same as emailing or having phone calls. So I really like the traditions. I like the idea of the 2.5 sword lengths apart. I like the idea that we referred to my honourable friend or my right honourable friend and all of that, because it keeps it all dignified. But why shouldn't we robustly, as long as we keep in order, debate things with each other? And another big change, you and I know, Roger, that we've lost the art of filibustering, because when Blair came in 1997, who hosted the place, all argument stopped. We guillotined everything. So nowadays we're sort of down to 3 minutes, really. I know some people say, well, everything that needs to be said, David, can be said in 3 minutes. Now, come on. I think it would be nice to be able to speak a little bit longer than that. But I love the traditions in the House, and I don't want them to change for the sake of it. And the other thing I would say, Roger, look, there's been a mass turnover of MPs. You and I have been there for nearly 40 years. The average expectancy is 8 years. So all that knowledge which should have been passed on, it's gone, because we don't meet in the tea room anymore. We're not there for the all-night sittings anymore. It's a quick word and a quick aside. So I'm a traditionalist, and I'm hanging on to those traditions. And also, Roger, I do not want us to leave the building for 10 years. I absolutely do not want that to happen. I don't think we can afford it. And I think if we're out there for 10 years, we're never going to come back. There we are. I'm going to shut up.
So if I can just pick up on that theme of change, if I may, David, one of the areas that's seen a great deal of change as well over the time has obviously been the way in which we campaign. And I know you've got a very vibrant YouTube presence, as I've seen, and you clearly indicated that you're a new recruit to Twitter. I was just wondering how you think political campaigning has changed over the years, and also how has your communication about what you do in Parliament and for your constituents changed? How have you addressed that, do you think, has changed?
Really good question, Natalie, and I do actually address some of it in the I've got to plug the book.
Yeah, that's good.
In the book. But again, campaigns aren't anywhere near the fun that they used to be. When I go back to the time I stood in 1979 in the London Borough of Newham, that had 100% Labour council, 100% always had Labour MPs. But I got a cavalcade. I mean, the general public was shocked about it. And it was called the Bluebell campaign, and we had all these floats going down the high street. We had the song about Margaret Thatcher. Do you remember, Roger? Maggie May, Maggie, 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 vote for Maggie. Oh, it was wonderful. And it wasn't the silly over-the-top stuff that we get in America, with all the bits of paper falling down, but it was out there, it was campaigning, and it was meeting people. So again, being old-fashioned, at the end of every general election, I hire an open-top double-decker bus. I and my supporters are on the top of it, and I only represent our little tiny urban area with a loud hailer, and I go around thanking everyone for voting for me. And I have a sort of mini cavalcade on the day of the election. I mean, it was a great shock for Southend West, because for 100 years they'd had the upmarket Guinness family represent them, and suddenly they had downmarket David Amos represent them. But I like elections and campaigning to be fun. So, true story, Natalie. John Major, who became famous, as Roger will recall, for the soapbox campaign in 1992, I was doing it before him. In Basildon, I had small step ladders. I would climb onto the step ladders with a few crowd of supporters in front of me, and then I would sort of make a speech like you get at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park and at Tower Hill, and I loved it. Nowadays, Natalie, first of all, everyone seems to have voted before the actual polling day. I mean, we make it so easy for everyone to vote now. You practically have a sedan chair. There are overseas voters, absent voters, postal voters, proxy voters. So half the time on the actual day, people have voted. Roger and I would have had tellers at polling stations. You would knock them up on the day to make sure they haven't voted. Well, half the time they've already voted. And so I think a lot of the fun and razzmatazz have gone out of it, and a big change, Natalie. When I first started, you would hold a public meeting and you get a reasonable attendance there now. If I held a public meeting, no one would turn up other than the political activists, unless I said, right, you'll all get £10 if you turn up. And I think, like most MPs now, it's all a waste of time and you just accept the one organised by the churches, tick the box and move on. So the public meetings have gone. I think a lot of the fun of elections have gone in it. I can see Margaret Thatcher now with all what she would regard as celebrities coming onto the stage with her. We'd have a real celebration, and all that has changed dramatically. I did think the low point of campaigning was probably the 2017 general election, where we weren't meeting the general public, holding up these silly things, saying vote Conservative in airport hangars. Crazy. I think whoever is our leader, they've got to go and meet the general public and sell their message to them.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a great shame that so much of electioneering has now become computerized, and the people, to some extent, have been taken out of it. It's all too slick, and it's very professional and very clever. But I can't, like you, I can't say I like it. I want to take you back. You mentioned John Major, and I actually think that history will judge John far more kindly than perhaps his contemporaries have done. A good man and a kind man, and actually at the time a very good prime minister, and also for you and I both a dear friend.
Yeah.
Do you remember the night when Eric Heffer, who was literally dying, came back to the chamber because he wanted to vote, or probably for the last time? And after that vote, he got a round of applause as John Major walked across the floor and shook him by the hand.
Yeah.
I thought that was one of the most magnanimous things that I've ever seen in the chamber. It was very moving indeed, which leads me to the question. We all stand on the shoulders of giants, of course. I've got my list of men and women who I admire politically on both sides of the house. And I just wonder who yours are.
Yeah. Well, Roger, without you and I sort of being cast as last of the summer wine, I do remember that very, very well indeed. And I was there for Eric Heffer. I don't think Eric particularly liked me. I wasn't his sort of person, but he was incredibly brave. And I do remember that last speech. And you are right about John Major. Look, you and I have had different views on Europe. I had different views on Europe to John, but he was an outstanding parliamentarian and a very good, kind man, and never grand. But look, I'm going to say this, Roger. For me, it would always be Margaret Thatcher. Always will be Margaret Thatcher. And how lucky you and I were. There are just a handful of colleagues left who were there during her peak. We were there during 2 terms when she was at the height of her powers. And I just thought she was this extraordinary woman. I mean, this woman, and to me, the little things in life count. If you do a little handwritten note to me, I love it, or a little handwritten message. And she worked on the basis that we're all sinners, and she helped and supported us. There was a very different side to Margaret Thatcher than I think some people portrayed her as. And I think she changed our country and changed the world, and she made them both better places in which to live. I mean, Michael Heseltine, a giant of a figure, wonderful, wonderful orator. Again, looking back to our early days, Roger, I think John Biffin was an absolutely outstanding leader of the House. And of course, going to the other side, look, putting aside Enoch Powell's views on race, when Enoch Powell spoke, if it comes up on the Enunciator that David Amos is speaking, the chamber empties. Now, if Enoch Powell's name comes up, it used to fill with people, and you could hear a pin drop because he was so eloquent, so clever, absolutely amazing. Tony Benn, at the peak of his powers, I thought he was a wonderful orator. Michael Foot would just be remembered for wearing that donkey jacket at the Cenotaph, but he was very skillful. Shirley Williams, Roy Jenkins. But I think it's going to be Margaret all the time. I also think, Roger, talking about prime ministers, David Cameron, who, we weren't really each other's sort of person, but and I didn't want to go into a coalition, but he was right, I was wrong. He was an outstanding parliamentarian. He was wonderful at the dispatch box. He dominated the House of Commons. And I think with George Osborne, who was a first-class chancellor, I wrote to them after it all happened, I'm so sorry that they felt that as a result of the referendum, they left the House of Commons so early. I think that was a great, great shame. I mean, I could go on and on about people that I admired, but I have to say, Roger, at the end of it, it would be politicians that no one's ever heard of. These humble politicians who weren't big names, whose knees were probably knocking when they had to get up and make a speech in a full house, but they were representing their constituents. They were never in the limelight. The media never courted them, but they were doing excellent work rather quietly behind the scenes.
Oh, I feel like I definitely go into that knees knocking territory actually when I have to stand up for my constituents. It's a remarkable and such an extraordinary experience actually being in the chamber, and I am very much looking forward to us going back to being back there. Actually, I think it makes a lot of difference. But I wanted to just pick up on that sort of theme of role models and humility, really, if I may. Because Mrs. Thatcher made a profound impact on me for a very different reason, because I was at primary school when she came to power in 1979, and she created this environment where a working class girl like me had the courage to believe in herself, and that she could, do things, and that it was right to have that optimism and opportunity. And I know, David, that you, like me, have had a more humble background, and I just wonder in what way you found that optimism, that opportunity, and how you feel that it's influenced what you've done in politics so far.
Yeah, well, I think she taught me, Natalie, that let's be frank, when I first started, it was seen as the Conservative benches were full of moneyed people. Everyone was posh and there was no room for working class people. That was left to the Labour side. Well, I think Margaret taught me that we're all equal in one sense. And the fact that we weren't born with a silver spoon in our mouths, we have made the most of our God-given opportunities. So whether it be through education, grammar schools, assisted status, home ownership, owning shares, and all of that philosophy, she was just wonderful, really, just born above the shop. And I think having broken the long line of Etonians, there's nothing wrong with Etonians being in the cabinet and all of that, and I do know my place. I think she taught us the value of life. And what I particularly liked about Margaret, Natalie, and you'll laugh at this, I was brought up to value the small things in life. So when you had a meal, you had to clear your plate. It was wasteful to leave food. Every penny counted. Not to be mean, to be kind and generous to other people. And Margaret was just wonderful in that respect, really. And I think she also taught me not to be bullied. So when, during, Roger, my early time, we had the miners bullying other people over what they saw was their livelihood being cut off, which wasn't the case at all. I think she taught me to be firm and to be strong. And unlike some politicians, she didn't just come out with policies for the sake of it and follow behind something which they thought was popular. I hate that, frankly, being a little bit behind the bus. Tell people what you believe in, and then try and persuade them to that point of view. And that is what Margaret did. And that's how she became so successful. And I'm not going to name names, Natalie, but I do think we've had one or two leaders since who frankly haven't spelt out what they've stood for. We know they stand for themselves and we know they stand for ambition, but I actually want their vision, really. And yeah, times have changed a lot now, but I think at the moment we are struggling with parliamentarians who've thought it all through, and they must have people advising them, and to set out where we are going, whether it be the health service. I know social care is a difficult nettle to grapple, transport, relations with countries overseas. But for me, Margaret would be the benchmark in what sort of inspires me. And I know I pick up there are one or two colleagues saying we've got to ditch all that. Okay, what are we going to replace it with? That's what I want to hear. So let someone come forward with a new type of conservative philosophy, because underneath it all, Natalie, I want conservatives. I don't want people chosen by conservative associations who turn out not to be proper conservatives.
Okay, now then, we've spent a fair bit of time, well, I've spent a fair bit of time dragging you back into the past, because that's what old men do, they reminisce. But I think the House has changed. And I said to a friend fairly recently, you know, I wouldn't advise any of my kids to go into the House of Commons. Well, the person who was much wiser than me said, yes, but you're trying to remember it as it was, whereas somebody coming in now sees it as it is today. And it's different. But the fact that it's different doesn't mean it's worse. Now, there's a fair chance that one day you're going to be the father of the house. If you survive, and I'm sure you will. So you'll have a lot of young people, and they'll be looking very young, like policemen these days, coming into the House and turning to you for advice. What are you going to say to them, and what sort of parliament do you want to see, not for the past, but for the future?
Yeah, well, Roger, none of us can see a crystal ball. Do I want to be father to 649 colleagues when I've got 5 of my own, and there are different challenges there? We'll see. But, you know, if you'd have told me in 1983 that I would still be here now, I would never have believed it. I really wouldn't. And the turnover of members of parliament, obviously there have been different circumstances why people have retired or just left parliament, seems to have quickened the pace. I, like you, Roger, have never encouraged any of my children to go into politics, because they did have some tricky moments which sort of affected one or two of them. Although I've got one particular daughter who's as tough as whatever, and she might be what the House of Commons needs. She's much tougher than me. And some people might say, well, you're a weak conservative, David. Your daughter, this particular daughter, is a proper conservative. But look, Roger, when people come to me before they've entered the House and ask for my advice, I set out the pluses and minuses. And I always say, look, your experience will be different to mine. So it's no good me talking about how it used to be. It's how it is now. But I try and open their ideas, Roger, to the fact that you've got to be realistic about what you can achieve as an MP. And I don't want to start an argument about our membership of the European Union, but I felt very, very strongly that my power as a member of parliament as a result of our membership of the European Union was being diluted. That's what I personally felt. And I'm anxious that we try and get more and more power back so that when you actually go and vote, it really counts. But politics is the art of the possible. And I think when you're young, you possibly think that you can change everything just like that. And I try and open their eyes about it. But like you, Roger, when you go around the schools, I want to encourage young people to go into politics and to have their say. And Natalie and I have said from humble backgrounds, we've got there, and there's no reason why they can't. So if any of my colleagues who've recently been elected in the 2019 election, who look unbelievably young, but I suppose I looked young when I was first elected, I don't know. Some have asked me for advice. I don't know whether they've taken any of it, but perhaps if you and I hang around in the tea room when we're able to, Roger, we could go into a little corner together and perhaps give them wisdom, because I've got to say, you and I know, Roger, your enemies aren't opposite you. They really are behind you. And it's knowing who to trust and who not to trust. And, you know, I am going to mention something. The last 22 meeting, to think that a colleague was at the 22 meeting and immediately released something that was purported to be said. That is absolutely appalling and unforgivable. And if we're honourable members, then let there be honour between each and every one of us. And that's something that I would say to new colleagues. And another thing I would say, Roger, you're kidding yourself if you think you can have friends in the media. They come and go. And what they're after is the next best story. And when we get back to normality, I've seen over and over again, members of the press sitting in Portcullis House with their tea and coffee, and members stupidly going up to them, pouring their hearts out, and then the next day it's in the papers and no good comes of it. So
well, I think I can safely say that I'm not seeking out many people in the media. And I'm not sure it was a 2019er who did that. I do think it was utterly disgraceful, and it's interesting, isn't it? People say we want to be told first, we want to have those confidences, we want to know that we're in the tent, and then they do that and leak. It's not good stuff. But thinking about that challenge in terms of what you think can be achieved, one of the things that I thought was really good that you were involved with was the Warm Homes initiative. It's something that I'm very interested in as well. And looking back, you made a difference in a number of ways. I hope you would like to think you made a difference in a number of ways. And I wondered, of the things that you've been most passionate about, which ones have you really felt you've managed to move forward? And what would you still like to do? And what are the sort of big political issues or campaigns or personal campaigns that you're interested in that you'd like to see change?
Well, Natalie, every year there is a ballot for a private members bill. And until you're there, you don't understand that 20 names are drawn out. On the 18th occasion, my name was drawn out. And suddenly I became popular among all sorts of people, and they were lobbying me on choosing their bill to promote. These are outside lobbyists. I didn't know what fuel poverty was. I'd never heard the expression before, but my goodness, the Friends of the Earth people and others who came to see me, they educated me on the issue. And I was like that because I had strong views on embryo research, abortion and all things like that. I thought, no, I want this bill to become law, and I need professional people behind me. And literally with 5 minutes to go before making the decision, I chose the Warm Homes and Energy Conservation Bill. Well, Roger, I had two enemies, and they were David McLean, now Lord McLean, and Eric. I mean this in the nicest sense, but those two used to sabotage private members' bills, a little bit like one or two of our colleagues these days, Natalie. And it was dreadful. But because I took time to learn the procedure of the House, I managed to withdraw the bill as it went through its passages. At the last minute, I pulled a flanker on them and I actually beat them at their own game. It's a long, long story, but that's how it became the law. It was the most expensive private members bill ever. It meant that you could insulate your lofts, get your doors and windows done. Really, really proud of that one. And there's a few other bits of legislation I pioneered. But I mean, another example, Natalie, which I'm not Jewish. There's Jewish blood in us all. I've been proud to be born a Jew. Someone working for me said, David, read this book about Raoul Wallenberg. I didn't know anything about him. Swedish diplomat, saved the lives of 100,000 Jews. And through a bill, it took 2 years of my life, we got the statue put up, a huge statue outside the central London synagogue. And the Queen, Duke of Edinburgh, the President of Israel came and unveiled it together. And I hope that Jewish people, when they go to worship, are impressed by that. But you asked me, Natalie, what would I like to put right? I want our country, this tiny little island, which has had an influence all over the world. I'm so proud of it. I mean, how does that happen? And people now trying to disown the various things which have gone on. I am fifth largest economy. I want us to really lead the world again. And I think we've got a number of weak national leaders at the moment. So whether it's Boris, I want the UK to lead the world in so many areas. Why? We've only got to look at our vaccination program, which is absolutely incredible, really. Because I think if you look at our history, we can be proud of it. We've always had the stability of the monarchy there. We haven't gone for an elected president. And I think there's an awful lot of things that we can do. But I suppose the main thing today, Natalie, I really do mean this. It breaks my heart that people feel that they have to lie on pavements, rough sleepers and all of that. And certainly the number of people with mental health problems is much, much bigger than it ever was. You can't solve the housing problem and give everyone a home, because families are very, very different to as they used to be in the East End of London. But somehow, Natalie, in this small little island, I'd like our party, okay, we can talk about what we did with the sale of houses, but to tackle that again and try and solve it. And frankly, there's a lot of space in Scotland now, whether they're all put off by Mrs. Cranky or not, I don't know. But I'd like to see huge house building projects in Scotland and Wales, where there's a lot more space than there is, as we know, in the southeast of England.
Just in passing, Natalie, the way back in that piece of the conversation, David referred to Eric. Eric was Eric IV, who died horribly prematurely, was extremely colourful, as borne out by the ties that he used to wear, but was one of the best parliamentarians probably of our generation. Outstanding man. Credible. In your opening remarks, David, you referred to animal welfare. We can't, we're nearing the end of this conversation, we can't let it go without touching on animal welfare. When you and I were kicking things around, I think there was you, me, and Teddy Taylor.
Yeah.
About it.
David Atkinson.
And David Atkinson, who were opposed to fox hunting.
Yeah.
Things have changed quite a lot. And I think you ought to say, and use this platform to say where you think, as a nation of so-called animal lovers, we ought to be going now to maintain our animal welfare standards and to enhance them.
Well, you've been better at this issue than I have, Roger, because your wife has frankly been absolutely outstanding in this issue. And I can see the pair of you now standing behind trestle tables, promoting animal welfare issues. Absolutely wonderful. And of course, you are so right. And I'm full of pride now, and I'm going to say Lorraine Platt, through the Conservative Animal Welfare Group, she's worked day and night to get more and more of our colleagues on side on these issues. And we're not silly about animals, but we want to see animals treated with respect and treated well. And again, Roger, I think that now we've left the European Union, we have got because I was very concerned that a number of European countries did not treat animals as well as we do. And if when there is an inquiry into the coronavirus pandemic, if it is true that it all stemmed from the way bats were being sold in markets in parts of China, and we don't know whether or not that is the case. Well, that says it all. I think animal welfare is so important, and I'm very optimistic about this, Roger. I don't know how you feel, because I think that the ministers that we have in place, by and large, they seem pro-animal welfare. I mean, none of them support violent protests or anything like that, but they want to encourage people to stop the live export of animals, to stop cruelly animal testing on animals for cosmetics and the likes, because I think, if anything, this lockdown has proved how important animals are to so many people on their own. How lovely it is to get home at night. The family may be full of moans and groans, but the dog jumps up on your lap and wants to lick you all over, or the cat is climbing up of you and you hug them, and it's great comfort. So I think each and every one of us really values animals, and it's great working alongside you, Roger, for so long on these animal welfare issues. And I'm so glad that our party is in a much better place on animal welfare issues than it ever was, because you and I know during the 13 years of that Labour government, they promised so much and they delivered so very little.
I think that's a really good point to draw out. I mean, I know how much Roger has done on this. I mean, everyone does locally, and I think one of the most important things that we've been able to progress is moving forward on live animal exports actually locally, because we don't want it, we haven't wanted it, and we wanted to stop it, and we haven't been able to with the whole EU thing. So I think that's really good that we're able to do that. And another area that you touched on there quite rightly, another area that I'm very involved in, that of rough sleeping. I think the Everyone In programme during the coronavirus pandemic has been nothing short of remarkable. I think it's been exactly the right thing to do, and you know, to see Robert Jenrick now building on that to actually try and make sure that we help people make that journey from rough sleeping, from homeless to housed, I think is really good. So I agree. I think there's some really important points that we have at this moment, and we've got to make sure we push those through and make the difference. And in terms of that kind of thinking about you know, what we do as government, what happens with voluntary groups and charities. I know that you support a lot of different charities, and you are with this book as well. So one of the ones that particularly I wasn't so familiar with, and I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about, is Music Man Project. What's that about, David?
Well, I'm so blessed that we have locally a chap called David Stanley, who is the deputy head of one of our local secondary schools, and him and his wife belong to the local Salvation Army. Incredibly talented, they can sing, dance, and all the things that I can't do. And they both formed a real connection with people with learning difficulties. Now, Natalie, when I first became an MP, I'll never forget going to one of these homes in South Ockenden and seeing these people in straitjackets. Now, that is literally what used to happen. And when you think now that these people who were completely written off, and it's a real tearjerker that through the power of music, this organisation, the Music Man Project, which has grown throughout the whole of the country, has transformed people's lives. And these were people who have to be stabilised because of their muscles, you know, banging their heads and all of that. It's just incredible. So they performed at the London Palladium. They performed at the Royal Albert Hall. And if it hadn't been for the coronavirus pandemic, we would have been going over to Broadway and also performing at Carnegie Hall. And all of that will happen. And part of the royalties from the book will go to the Music Man Project.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. That's a lovely story. As a mere male, you'll understand that I'm also delighted that you're going to be supporting prostate cancer charities, because it is a killer disease, and not enough attention in the past has been paid to it. So all power to you, and I hope that this raises a lot of money for prostate cancer as well.
Well, you and I know, Roger, we chaps aren't as good looking out for ourselves as ladies. Ladies are much tougher, and I think they're much more aware of their personal health. So a local constituent came to me with the issue about the suffering from prostate cancer, had a new sort of therapy, and it worked for him. So he set up this charity called Prostate. We launched it in the House of Commons, and it's already been a great success. And yes, you're absolutely right. Part of the royalties will go to his organisation to spread greater awareness through men, watch your PSA levels, and do look out for yourself.
And also, I think in relation to something which affects a lot of women and can lead to fertility and other issues as well, endometriosis. I think that's the third charity that's going to benefit from the royalties. Is that right, David?
It is, Natalie. Again, I'd never heard of endometriosis, but I certainly have now. Another young lady came to my surgery, poured her heart out, describing these endless surgeries. And I, without going into detail, I just hadn't understood that these things go on within a lady's body. And of course, you would have thought, having 4 daughters myself, I would know all about it, but I didn't. And through this lady, we now have an all-party parliamentary group, which is very well supported. We've had an inquiry. I was really pleased that a few weeks ago, a health minister included it in future plans that the government have to address all the anxieties that ladies with endometriosis are suffering. So yes, part of the royalties will go through that charity as well. Well, look.
Just a sec. No, before, I'm not going to have the last word. You're going to have the last word.
Okay.
I just want to say this.
Yeah.
Natalie and I are both delighted that you're doing this in the Garden of England, God's own county, of course. I mean, I've heard of Essex. I'm not quite sure where it is. But I think now is the moment when you have to wave the book around and tell us what is in the book, because that's what this is about if we're going to raise the money for the charity.
Yeah. So it's called Eyes and Ears, a survivor's guide to Westminster. I mean, this really is a pun on us voting aye and no, and ears is listening out for all the different stories. And what I've tried to do, Roger, I haven't been nasty about anyone. Well, because people keep asking what the next book is about. Well, the next book, you're going to be pleased, Roger, it's about animals. And the book after that is about being born, the bit in between, death, a bit up there. And the sequel to this will be when I've left the House of Commons. And as you know, Roger, I'm only halfway through my parliamentary career, because frankly, when I do release the next book, I just won't have the money to be able to employ Carter Ruck to fight off all the libel cases that will be made against me. But I've sort of, it's an insider's book, which I think gives outsiders an insight into the traditions of the House of Commons and how it works or tries to work. It also gives an insight to some of the characters there. It gives a little diary about the coronavirus pandemic and about our attempts to leave the European Union and Brexit, but it isn't a nasty book about colleagues. So every colleague is in it. It's whether or not you think you fit into the particular type of person I've described. But thank you, Roger. Well, Roger and Natalie, you've been fantastic interviewers. I want to be your agent. You've got a full-time job. And I do hope, ladies and gentlemen, you have tonight enjoyed the discussions that I've had with Roger and Natalie. They've asked, I think, absolutely brilliant questions. And I hope it's given you a better insight to the way we politicians operate in Westminster. So thank you all for viewing this discussion, and please buy the book, because all the money goes to charity. Good night, everyone. Good night.
This is my journey so far. Where I was born, where I became a councillor, when I was first elected to Parliament, and where I am now the Member of Parliament for. Enjoy my journey. I hope you enjoy reading my book, Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster.